I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water.
It's about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
Join movement expert Aaron Alexander as he dives into the minds of the foremost innovative healthcare thinkers and movement masters on their approach to optimal health and wellness. Align Podcast.
Welcome back to Align Podcast. My name is Aaron Alexander. In today's phenomenal episode, I got to have one of my friends, Mr. Jim Kwik. Jim is truly a legend in the world of thinking more effectively, memory enhancement, coaching various different celebrities and all sorts of influential folks around the world on how to make their noggins work more better. More better, that is actually some vernacular from Hawaii. That's pigeon, things working more better. More better, la that. This is not starting off well, this introduction. He works with a plethora of pretty serious celebrities, ranging from Jim Carrey to Will Smith, all sorts of interesting individuals in between. Amazing story, grew up with some brain trauma, and he was known as the boy with the broken brain. So his story is really fascinating. In this conversation, we get into how to memorize quotes, how to read faster, how to think better in general, different tips in relation to nutrition, and various different hacks of sorts. I don't love that term, but we do get into some special things that could be considered a brain hack. So here's a little clip.
And I feel like that, we stop playing because we grow older, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe we grow older because we stop playing.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the website, aligntherapy.com. If you were drawn to that URL, you will find the 5-day movement challenge where you can learn the fundamentals of how to integrate better movement into 100% of what you do on a day-to-day basis. Every moment can become an opportunity to move better if you got some education on that thing. Thank you guys for leaving us reviews on the iTunes or anywhere, any place that you are listening to this little mofo. I got one from Senor Huevos. Senor Huevos. That is slang term for testicles, I'm pretty sure. Senor Huevos. Fantastic podcast, 5 stars. First heard Aaron Alexander on the Aubrey Marcus podcast and right away thought, this dude knows what's up. And of course, had to check out his podcast and have since been exposed to so many great thinkers and ideas. Aaron really has a wealth of knowledge in many aspects of life and has inspired me to be more conscious of my movements, my alignment, and my overall health. Thank you so much for that tremendous review. Really appreciate that. That is how we get boosted up in the algorithmic gods of iTunes and all the different players. So thank you guys for doing that. It takes just a second. You can just scroll down on your phone right now, pause this thing, and shoot us a little 5-star review. It helps us out more than you could imagine. And Senor Huevos, hit us up at Align Band. Shoot us a direct message, and we will send you out some products from Organifi, some type of superfood deliciousness. I think we are good to go. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can jump over, if you had interest in this podcast conversation, you can jump over to the Kwik Brain podcast with Jim Kwik, where he continues the conversation with me, and we get into more of the specifics around how movement affects our brain. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. Here we go, back to the show, Mr. Jim Kwik. Pow.
Align Podcast.
This is the very first interview I've ever done barefoot and I'm like all grounded. And what kind of tea is this?
That is GHB and ayahuasca, actually.
It's going to be a fun interview.
It's going to be the power of placebo.
Mind blown.
Yeah, and we just got done. You were just upside down, like.
Dude, that was also my very first acro yoga ever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate that. I got to have you on my show because you're my movement coach. So this is awesome. I'm stoked.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
What kind of movement stuff do you do? Have you tinkered or put any thoughts, ideas into that connection of movement, body, and all that to memory and brain, or has it been more just up in the...
It's all cognitive.
It's all right up there.
Yeah, it's really hard to separate the mind and the body.
Feels that way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you have a thought, it affects your body, obviously. But it's also, the reverse is also true. That as the body moves, the brain grooves.
Yeah.
As the body moves, the brain grooves. And there's all kinds of research. I mean, it is definitive. Everything from movement, creating, brain-derived nootropic factors to help you to be able to learn, promoting neurogenesis, neuroplasticity. There's a study done at Oxford University discovered that jugglers actually have bigger brains. That learning how to juggle actually creates more white matter. And so I love this. I mean, I love the sessions that we're doing also. So thank you.
Cool, man. Einstein, apparently so we need at some point, we need to talk about how I can remember quotes and facts. Because I have most of the things that I say in the Line podcast are 90% accurate. And then there's a 10% that's wavering. So I'd like to sort that out. But Einstein, one of the specific parts of his brain, when they I think it's probably still saved somewhere. Do you know where Einstein's brain is? I feel like this is right.
No, it's been sliced and diced.
Sliced and diced apart, yeah.
It's interesting. Actually, his brain is actually, if you don't know this, it's actually, the average human brain is about 3 pounds, but his actually was actually less. But there are certain parts of his brain that had more connections, that were denser, because he would do these thought experiments. And every single time you have these different thoughts, the brain, we talk about, I'm like a brain coach. Just as people have coaches for their body and they want it to be faster, stronger, more agile, more flexible, more vitality. I do that for people's minds. And it's interesting because the same thing with your body. If you want to build a muscle, you give it novelty and you give it nutrition. And same thing, that's actually what supports neurogenesis, neuroplasticity. Genesis meaning birth, neuro, the brain. It creates, the idea that you can create new brain cells the day you die. And neuroplasticity is saying your brain is like plastic in a good way. It's very malleable. And the key to making those connections is novelty and nutrition. Novelty of thought or novelty of body. And so this is awesome. I mean, it's so fascinating. If anyone wants to improve their self-esteem overnight, just study the brain. Study your brain.
It's interesting. You see that with big, bulky bodybuilders and stuff, which I pick on a lot, but it's all out of love. I think you can be a really rad, huge-bodied human being and also be really agile and be able to move really well. It is possible. But in general, I know that you really appreciate Bruce Lee and folks of that nature. He's a little guy, so he packs all this power and all this punch into this tiny, hyper efficient little body. And then it seems like you're saying we kind of do a similar thing with the brain.
We can. Maybe. I mean, Bruce was Bruce was like a $125, right? And he's martial artist. He inspired a lot of bodybuilders. If you listen to watch interviews, and he was also a writer. And he was a philosopher. I mean, he used his mind. I really do believe, especially the age that we're in right now, yes, you want to improve your movement and your muscle power, but it's also your mind power also as well. The challenge is where do you get that education? Just same thing with school. It's kind of interesting how they're cutting programs in physical education and recreation, but people have to move. And now I'm really concerned because with children growing up on digital devices and they're taking away a lot of seesaws and swings because it's too dangerous, that they're being, overprotected and they're not able to go out there and play. And I feel like that, we stop playing because we grow older, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe we grow older because we stop playing. And when I'm talking about children, you think about the fastest learners on the planet, children, right? How fast can they learn a new ability? How fast can they learn another language? How fast can they pick up a musical instrument, right? But part of it is, yes, they're still forming neurologically, but also they ask a lot of questions. Sometimes adults, they feel like once their mug is full, then it's they can't put anything else in. And they feel like they know it all. But the other thing is they don't play as much. And I think that sense of wonder, adventure, experimentation, like a child doesn't just try to walk a few times and then just says, okay, I can't do it, falls down. It's like it quits. But sometimes adults, we do that. And so having that freedom, where I know we're going to talk about quotes, I train a lot of actors to memorize their lines. Right, and I got to opportunity to work with Jim Carrey, and I was always a big fan. And I remember we were in his kitchen and we were making guacamole. Avocados, by the way, are great brain food. And I asked him what his superpowers are and why he does what he does, because I always want to know, Aaron, what motivates people, what drives them, because it's so important. And And I find that common sense is not common practice. A lot of us know what to do, but we don't always do the things that we know, right? And part of it has to do with tapping into that motivation or that drive. For him, though, I found out that I was like, why do you play all these wild characters like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and everything, these firefighters and stuff? And he's like, I act very extreme on camera because I want to give permission for people to be themselves. And it's wild because his passion, when I was like, we're fine tuning it, his religion, quote unquote, is helping free people of concern.
Yeah.
The concern of other people, like the expectations people have that make you give you these walls or these barriers or these borders that you have to live in between. So I was like, wow. So he acts, kind of insane, quote unquote. So it's like, hey, you could be normal, whatever your version of normal is, and you could do it with a place of sovereignty and power.
Yeah. It's almost like I've been saying that. The reason I slapped you as you were saying this, because I've been saying that for a while in relation to movement and like a dance party, for example. So if you go to a place where the potential to dance exists, nobody wants to be the first person, because everyone's staring at you, and once you get the first weirdo out on the floor, it's like, okay, the second's a little bit easier, but it's not until there's like this tipping point of like, okay, there's 4 or 5 people on the floor.
Right.
I can do what I've wanted to do all night. I can finally be myself. I can finally let loose.
Yeah, and you could express yourself. Going back to Bruce Lee, that's really what he wanted, the human being to express themselves fully. It could be whether it's body movement or it could be their voice, karaoke, same thing. You go out karaoke and sometimes people have to wait to other people to, get comfortable and such. But yeah, anything that we could fully, and dance, by the way, and this, is incredible for the brain.
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of the best things to do physically to be able to stave off mental cognitive aging and decline, where we slow down and we're not a really good thinker and our memory fades. But any kind of dance and movement, huge for the brain.
Yeah. I was reading a thing recently because I did a thing with Max Lugavere, who you're also buddies with. And I was reading some article that came out of the Scientific American is where I read the thing, but it called dance as being like I mentioned it to you, like a pleasure double play, where we kind of have we get this stimulation and this nice sensation of hearing the music itself, and then we also get that sensory motor kind of feedback of, oh, you actually have to move, and you actually have to bridge your physical movement to the dance. So you have to kind of find this lock and key type system. And so that it's that discovery of that lock and key. It almost like, it feels to me like it's like neuroplasticity. It's like a metaphor of neuroplasticity. Yeah. Your body's like, oh, how do we do it? You're like, oh, okay, I found it.
Yeah.
And it seems like, from what they say, like that can't not happen in the brain at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's one integrated system.
Yeah, the brain, people don't realize this. The primary role and responsibility of the brain is to control our movement.
Mm-hmm, right.
And that's how important it is. And so movement's life.
Yeah.
Like, think about it, the opposite. When something doesn't move, it's dead.
Yeah.
Right. And so fully moving, expressing yourself, having flexibility. They say that it was Oliver Wendell Holmes that said, a person's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions. And I feel like the human body is the same way. Yeah.
Okay, we got to talk about quotes, but one of the quotes that I got out of listening to your podcast, which I was genuinely impressed and really enjoyed, was, what's the name of your podcast?
It's called Kwik Brain. So my last name is Kwik, but the only thing is people have to, it really is my last name. You just have to spell it right. It's Kwik.
Yeah.
Kwik.
Yeah, so it's these really rad little like 10 to 15 minute tidbits of stuff that really helps, and you put it together really well. Like I was impressed. I got to take some notes out of your book.
It's one of those things that just people on social media, and I know you and I are very active there, with our education and stuff, sharing, my mess became my message. So that's where I put it, really a lot in social media. But it really came from people posting questions all the time. How do you remember names? How do you give a speech without notes? How do you read a book a day or a book a week? And instead of just typing it out on Facebook or Instagram, there's answers every single time. I just record it on my phone, and then we upload it, and it becomes an episode, and you have it in 10 minutes,
How the heck do you read a book in a day?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah. Well, we could do that. I know you're an avid reader. There are like books and supplements like everywhere here.
So they need to be read is the difference.
That's true.
A lot of people have a lot of books,
right?
But I'm like, how many of these have you actually absorbed? And then how many of you actually absorbed is a big thing too. Just because you stream through a book,
exactly,
and it feeds your ego, and you can kind of check the list,
right? And how many are you actually
too,
applying on top of that? So it goes from like, you know, how many people go out to how many people here with us right now have ever bought multiple books, and it sits on the shelf, and it becomes shelf help, not self help, right?
It's a prisoner.
It's a challenge, and that does absolutely no good. You get no points for going out there and buying a book and just having it look pretty on the shelf. And then how many people actually go out and actually read it, and then how many people actually understand and retain it, how many people from there actually apply it. Because it's a lie. It's a complete lie that knowledge is power. Knowledge is not power. It's potential power. You know, it only becomes power when we actually use it and take action on it.
Is there any take-home things that one could do to speed up their reading?
Yeah. So the truth is everybody listening to this could read faster, but not just faster. They could read it with better focus and comprehension. And that's really the key. Traditional speed reading has been long associated with skimming or scanning or skipping words or getting the gist of what you read.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have online programs and we have students in 180 countries. I train, you know, these interesting individuals. Like I train lots of top doctors. You don't want your doctor to get just to get the gist of what she's reading. You wouldn't want that. But how many of us ever read a page in a book, got to the end, and just forgot what we just read?
Yeah.
And you go back and you reread it and you still don't know what you just read. So we did 4 episodes on speed reading specifically. But cool. I would say that one of the things you could do when you're reading that's going to boost your focus and comprehension actually is using a visual pacer. So a visual pacer is like a pen, a pencil, highlighter, a mouse on a computer, your finger, and not going down the page or making fancy, motions, SZ kind of thing. Just underlining every single word, reading for full comprehension. If you do that, your reading speed will boost 25 to 50%, which is a huge lift, over time.
Why is that?
Because one of the things, a lot of what we teach is actually, we teach accelerated learning, but a lot of it is unlearning bad habits, similar to what you do with people's physiology.
Right.
All those bad habits people have about when they're sitting on the computer and they're slumped over and they have these bad posture and, they say sitting is the new smoking and, all these things that people, the bad habits people have with their body, they also have with their learning. We just didn't learn the right way. Because reading, you're not born with the ability to read. You were trained. But the question is, knowing that, when's the last time you took a class called reading? Like how old were you?
Right.
6, 7 years old?
It's probably the most important tool that you have.
Right. And
one of the most
I really do believe I think it's one of the best exercises for the mind also as well. It's right up there with dance, but people don't read anymore. And the reason why is it's not fun for them, right? It's when people read, they complain that, I'm getting tired, I get fatigued, I get frustrated. A lot of people use reading as a sedative to help them to sleep. And that's not the association we necessarily want when we're studying something and we want to be enlivened and we want to ponder and reflect on information. So using a visual pacer, and you could test this. I'm not saying, sometimes I don't believe the expert's always the person on the podcast or that writes a book. I think you listening to this are the expert of you. And just test it for yourself. Read for 60 seconds, count the number of lines you read, and then use your finger underlining for another 60 seconds, time yourself, and then count the number of lines you just read. And that second number will be 25, 50%.
Whoa.
And the reason why is, talk about unlearning bad habits. One of the bad habits most people have that they picked up when they were a child is called regression. This is the process of back skipping and rereading words or rereading whole lines by accident. And we could spend a lot of time there wasted. And using your finger when you read, you'd appreciate this. First of all, there's the reason why. I'll give you a few things. Number one, children naturally do it until they're trained not to do it. They naturally want to touch the page when they read.
That's true.
Number two, we do it. And nobody uses their finger while they read unless they were trained that way. But if I ask you to count the number of lines you read in 60 seconds, 100% of the people will go 1, 2, 3 with their finger, right? They'll use a visual pacer naturally. So we do it. Number 3, it's how our nervous system, our neurology is set up. Meaning, when you think about the brain and the spine and our senses, certain senses work very closely together. Meaning, have you ever tasted a great tasting fruit before? Like, have you ever, like, something right off the vine, right from the farmer's market, not something that's been sprayed and waxed and sitting in a grocery store?
I used to live in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Sweet papaya trees and avocado trees and all sorts of stuff.
Have you ever tasted like a great tasting peach before?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh.
Everyone
and they happen to be like butt cheeks, too.
Right.
Which adds, there's like an erogenous part of a peach.
And everybody here is like salivating because of one of those images.
one of the two.
But it's so funny how the imagination, the mind is interesting. On a side note, your mind doesn't know the difference between something you vividly imagine and something that's real. And that's a principle to better recall, is using the power of our imagination, right? But going back into this juicy peach, we're actually not tasting the peach. In actuality, because your tongue is not capable of tasting a peach, you're actually smelling the peach. So, but your sense of smell and your sense of taste are so closely linked that your mind can't process the difference. It knows it, though, when you're sick. When you're sick and you're congested in your nose, what does food taste like?
Nothing.
Right. It tastes bland or something, right? So you're not actually tasting the peach, you're smelling the peach, but sense of smell and taste are closely linked. Just as your sense of smell and taste are closely linked, so are your senses of sight and your sense of touch. So literally, what will happen is when people are using their finger while they read, a lot of people will say, Jim, I just feel more in touch with my reading. In fact, if you have a toddler here and you take out your keys and you shake it in front of the toddler and you say, look with your eyes, like look at these keys, look at the keys, what's the child going to naturally do? It's going to reach out and what? It's going to reach out and touch them or grab them.
And put it in his mouth.
Right.
Her mouth.
Exactly.
Probably.
So to be able to see it, they feel like they need to touch it. And the other reason why you use your finger while you read is it's how you're nervous, like it's your eyes are attracted to motion. You know, as a hunter-gatherer and you're in a bush, you have to look at what moves in your field because it's survival, right? Number one, let's say you're hunting lunch, like you're in this bush, you're hunting this rabbit or carrot, whatever your diet is, but the bush next to you moves. You have to look at what moves because number one, it could be lunch, or number two, you could be lunch, right? So your eyes are trained to look what moves. When you're using your finger while you read, you're actually being pulled through the information as opposed to your attention being pulled apart, which is a big challenge for a lot of people. In fact, when people lose their sense of sight, how do they read?
Braille.
Yeah, Braille, sense of touch. So what I would recommend for this brain hack here is if you want to read more in less time and have better focus understanding of it, try using your finger while you read. And here's the thing, don't rub your finger on the page or on the tablet, right? What you just want to be right above it because there's this thing called friction, and I've caught so many books on fire because I read really fast. That's
how fire was discovered, actually.
Exactly, I did.
Yeah, really smart people
through speed reading.
Yeah, exactly. I read that.
So this is a fact.
That's a true fact.
And so
it's one of my 90% facts.
If you see it on the internet,
10% of that I'm not sure about, but I'm pretty sure that's how fire was discovered.
Yeah. I think I saw that meme. You know, I think it was Abraham Lincoln on social media said that. So the thing is using your finger while you read. Try it, experiment it with it, and test it on yourself. And I think it'll help not only with your speed, but it'll help with your enjoyment.
Yeah. Have you ever heard that walking between learning something is really helpful as well?
Tremendously.
It's every 15 minutes, I think. It's like, or I'll feel that. I'll feel my body start to almost like itch if I've been really brainy about something. Yeah. I'll feel almost like this underlying urge to go and like walk it out. Yeah. And apparently that helps with creating neural connections.
It does. So when we move our body, a few things, and I know we're going to go into like memorizing information and quotes and facts and names and stuff like that. Taking breaks is important because number one, there's something called the Pomodoro technique that says that your attention span really is that. It's about 20, 25 minutes. And after that, there's a dip. A significant dip. And so what you're doing by taking a 5-minute learning break, or what I call a brain break, I do 3 things during that break. What happens is you're going to have diminishing returns because you've lost that focus and flow, right? So you take a 5-minute break, and I do 3 things that the brain loves. In no specific orders. I do deep breathing, which is why I love the work that we get to do together, because it's always making it conscious, because breathing is so important, because it's something you do unconsciously, but you could also consciously influence it. So it's like that bridge between the two.
And it's nose breathing as well as we're working. So a lot of people if they're mouth breathers all the time, there's a whole nother slew of issues with that.
Oh, absolutely. So the deep breathing is important, because also the oxygen is so important. A lot of people suffer from brain fog or mental fatigue. But what really they need to do is get more oxygen. And a lot of it has to do with their posture, right? If they're reading or they're on the computer and they're slumped over, not only is their physiology, from a visual mode to more of a kinesthetic mode, but also what you're doing is you're collapsing the diaphragm, the lungs, and
everything.
Yeah, I mean, I read that the lower 1/3 of your lungs absorbs up to 2/3 of the oxygen. So if you want to be at optimal, so oxygen is very important. So I do some deep breathing for that 5 minute, for that break, and it could be box breathing, alpha breathing, Wim Hof, fire breathing, whatever it is. Second thing is I hydrate. Right, because the brain is mostly water. People don't realize how much water they lose with little things like sleep. Right, you can lose a pound of water when you sleep through respiration and perspiration. The brain and body are 70% plus water. Hydrate, right, and have the best water ever.
Also, mouth breathing, you lose a lot more water. Yeah, you see, just breathe into a glass with your mouth versus your nose, and see, you'd be like, oh, there's science.
That's interesting. You were saying that it actually affects your physiology also for mouth breathers in terms of the chin.
Yeah, orthodontic issues.
Really?
Generally, yeah. I mean, so you're creating a little bit more restriction. It's a smaller pathway. So when you're breathing through the nose, it forces you to use the muscles of breath, your diaphragm muscles, and it could kind of creating that little restriction. It turns it into more of like an exercise.
Oh, I like that a lot.
And it also, nitric oxide ends up increasing. So by breathing through your nose, it ends up going through this whole elaborate pathway, and along that way, your body ends up releasing nitric oxide. So the mouth.
Isn't that amazing? Because this doesn't cost anything, right? The best things, and like when we're talking about these doctors, if you will, we're talking about breathing, and we're talking about water. And then the third thing that I want to make sure that I do is what we're talking about is movement.
Yeah.
As the body moves, the brain grooves, and I just don't want to be sedentary like that. And so working with you, I mean, I think everybody needs coaches. The fastest way to accelerate your performance and the results in your life is getting a coach, right? Singers have voice coaches. You have a personal trainer. People have business coaches or a financial coach. And so a movement coach, a brain coach, I mean, these are things that are really fundamental for people, especially for your community. They're here listening, watching, because they want to be the best version of themselves. Yeah. So they could be, do, have, and share the most of themselves. So yeah, I agree. When you're learning, every 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, take a break and nourish yourself, for a handful of minutes, and then, get back to what you're doing.
One of the quotes that I'll mess up until we break down how the heck to remember quotes in a second. But you mentioned in one of your podcasts a Rumi quote, and it said, trade or sell your cleverness for bewilderment.
That's amazing. That's spot on. Yeah.
Yeah. And so with that, is there any, because it feels like that's like a root. Like if you'll remember somebody's name if you really give a shit. You'll remember most information if you really have a reason to care. So is that kind of like a root level of working with people, of finding how to care?
It is, because we have the mechanics and the tactics. When it comes to your memory, one of the keys is emotion. And I always tell people that information itself is very forgettable, right? But information combined with emotion becomes a long-term memory. Yeah. Information is very ordinary. We're surrounded by billions of data sets out there, but information combined with emotion, and everyone knows this. You could prove it to yourself, because how many of us we can listen to a song, and it could take us back years, right? Or maybe it's a fragrance. Olfactory is one of the most powerful triggers for memory, right? Your sense of smell. Maybe because as hunter-gatherers, you need to smell if a food was, rotten or there was poison or something like that. But it's the fastest connection there. But or maybe it's a food. You could eat a food and take you back to when you were a child, because information combined with that emotion became a long-term memory. Maya Angelou, talking about quotes, said, people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel, right? And so that's going back to the power of emotion. And so there are 3 keys to a better memory. And who doesn't want a better memory, right? I believe 2 of the most costly words in work, in life, are I forgot. I forgot to do it. I forgot the meeting. I forgot what I read. I forgot that conversation. I forgot what I was going to say. I forgot that person's name, those kind of things. And so 3 keys to a better memory. Everyone just remember mom. Just remember mom. This is like the mother of all techniques, right? And so let's say somebody has trouble remembering people's names or remembering a quote, right? But there was a suitcase here of $1 million cash. And I know you have listeners all around the world, so whatever the equivalence would be, right? If you just remember like one quote or just remember the next stranger's name, who's going to remember that? Like everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because the first M in mom stands for motivation. And that's going back to why do we do what we do? Like I'm here, people don't know, like they've seen me on stage or on videos, and I'll memorize like 100 people's names or 100 words or 100 numbers forwards and backwards. But I always tell people, I don't do this to impress you. I do this to express to you what's really possible. Because the truth is, every single person listening to this could do that and a whole lot more. We just weren't taught. If anything, we were taught a lie that somehow your potential, your intelligence, your memory is fixed like your shoe size or something like that, right? And, because we all grew up with a 20th century education that prepared us for a 20th century world. But at the turn of the century, it was this following directions and working in assembly lines. We didn't have to be creative thinkers. We didn't have to use our imagination. We didn't have to be great strategists. And so I think if there's one skill to master in the 21st century, it's your ability to learn faster. And the reason why I know it's possible is because you know this, but a lot of people don't. I grew up with learning challenges, learning difficulties. I was put in special classes and programs. I had a head injury when I was 5 years old, and I didn't, just like a lot of kids being very active, I got hurt and I had brain injury and I had these learning difficulties. And for so many years, almost a decade and a half, I just struggled and suffered. I didn't understand things. Teachers would repeat themselves 3, 4, 5 times, and eventually I would lie and say, yeah, I understand, but I didn't understand anything. I didn't have a good focus. I had a very poor memory. It actually took me like 4 years longer just to learn how to read. I don't know if anyone could identify with this, or maybe you have somebody that struggles in these areas. But I taught myself how to read by reading comic books. That's why when people see, my Instagram or something, I always I talk about superheroes and the superhero journey, because I feel like we all have the potential to be modern day superheroes. And it wasn't until I learned these tactics and these techniques when I was in college, and I just everything got better. Everything in my life got better, and I started to be really a little bit upset, saying, why weren't we taught this in school? How useful would it have been to learn the things that you teach, about
So
movement and the body and kinesiology and sensory awareness, because those are all superpowers, or learning how to learn. And I always thought that back in school, where were they teach you what to learn, math, history, science, Spanish, but what about how to learn, how to think, how to be creative, how to focus, concentrate, to move, to optimally, your optimal health. You weren't taught how to remember things. It should have been the 4th R in school: reading, writing, arithmetic. But what about retention? What about recall? Yeah. Socrates says learning is remembering. And so my motivation for being here even now is when I started to help people. One of my very first students, I was tutoring her. She was a freshman. She read 30 books in 30 days. Can you imagine going online? And she read it. Understood it, was applying it, and I wanted to find out not how she did it, because I know, I taught her how to do it. I want to know why, going back to motivation. And again, I found out that, as I talked about, her mother was dying of terminal cancer. Right. And was given 2 months to live, 60 days by doctors. And the books she was reading were books on health, wellness, alternative medicine, energy, and she was determined to save her mom's life. 6 months go by, I don't hear from this young lady, and I get a call, and it's her, and she's crying and crying and crying, and I find out they're tears of joy that her mother not only survived, but is really getting better. Doctors don't know how or why, but her mother, doctors called it a miracle actually, but her mother attributed it 100% to the great advice she got from her daughter, who learned it from all these books. And at that moment, I realized this big aha in my mind and in my heart, that if knowledge is power, then learning is your superpower. That if knowledge is power, learning is your superpower. And I've committed my life, at the age of 9, I remember a teacher pointing to me talking to another adult saying, "That's the boy with a broken brain."
Fuck.
That stood with me. Every time, and it became my story, right? My self-talk. And adults have to be very careful talking around children, because your external words become their internal words. So every single time I didn't do well on a test, which was like every time, or I wasn't picked to be on the soccer team or whatever it was just, I have the broken brain. And that was it. And that was my identity and my belief. And so those kind of things, especially as a child, you pick up. And so, my goal is, because I was the boy with the broken brain, and I know what it feels like to work harder than everybody else and still not get the results, which we could all identify with. It's not working harder, but it's working smarter. But nobody taught us how to do that or learn smarter. So coming from the broken brain, I want to build better, brighter brains. And that's my mission. $1 billion doesn't really inspire me, but 1 billion brains, oh my God, that's awesome. Let's do that. That's why I started the podcast, because people could be listening to this right now, anywhere in the world, and who knows if they learn a couple of things on how to think clearer or be more creative or to retain great information or read better, and they could become the next Malala or the next Elon Musk or whatever, right? And they positively affect the planet. And that really excites me. So, no brain left behind. That's no body, no brain left behind.
How do you start to unwind the trauma of the idea attachment to being the boy with the broken brain? What's that look like?
Yeah. So I talk about in one of my podcast episodes 10 keys for unlocking a quick brain, how to have a quicker brain, right? KWIK, it's my thing is speed, because the one thing the reason why I respect every single person for listening to this conversation is because your most valuable asset is your time, is your attention. It's the two things, it's the things you can't get back, right? You could always make more money, but you can't have more time. And so that's why I want, I want this to be your one of the most valuable podcast episodes you've ever listened to, because I respect people's time, that way. Right. Going back, that's why I'm always talking about speed. How can you do the things like read faster, recall faster, think faster, not frantically fast, with a peace and a calm though. You know what I mean? Yep. Even what you do with your body, it's almost effortless when you're more efficient, right? And that's what we're talking about people's brain, because it's not like you use 10% of your brain. You use all your brain, but some people use their brain differently, more effectively. And so we did this episode on 10 keys, because 1/3 of your memory is predetermined by genetics and biology, but 2/3 is in your control. So it has to do with things like, in no particular order, a good diet, right? A good diet, you are what you eat. As our friend Max, we're talking about genius foods, and we did a whole episode on the 10, most important foods, my favorites, foods for the brain, because I believe what you eat matters, especially to your gray matter, right?
Yeah, right.
But the other thing besides that, you have stress management, you have exercise and movement, because as your body moves, your brain grows. Whatever's good for your heart generally is good for your head because of blood flow and oxygen. We talk about sleep and brain protection and EMFs. I read recently that over 90% of kids sleep with their phones right underneath their pillows.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
It's crazy.
What's that? How's that rewiring, our brains? And so a clean environment, a positive peer group. But one of the things is killing ants is actually clinically proven to be good for your brain.
Killing what?
Killing ants.
Ants?
Yeah.
Hormigas.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And ants.
Everyone, close your ears.
And ants stands for automatic negative thoughts. I got that from a friend, Dr. Daniel Amen, who's a brain doctor. Kill those ants, automatic negative thoughts. And that was a negative thought I had. It was I have the broken brain. And people do this all the time. They're like, Jim, I'm so forgetful, and I'm getting older, or this runs in my family, or I'm not, and somehow they're not enough, right? And what I feel like, why I feel so kindred with you and so many of your listeners is we're kindred spirits because our work is about transcending. It's like ending the trance.
Yeah.
Ending this mass hypnosis from marketing and media and everyone that's trying to control like our behaviors, that's saying we're not enough, that we have all these limitations and that we have to be fixed, and you know what I mean? This
Totally,
whole idea. And I believe, talking about, quotes, I believe in so many things that we read, basically, and it's about really transcending our approach in our beliefs about ourselves and our identities and such. And so that negative self-talk holds us back. And here's the thing, if you say to yourself, I have a horrible memory and all these things, it's like a belief, right? And you have to be careful of your self-talk because your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk. Your mind is always listening, right? I remember I was preparing to run a marathon, which is a lot of pressure when your name is Kwik, right? A lot of expectations. And I was reading this book, and one of the chapters was on the psychology, the mental part, and the mindset of running a marathon. And I was like, that's really interesting to me. So I read it, and one of the paragraphs said this verbatim, because I'm a memory expert, right?
Yeah, right.
We're going to talk about how to do this.
You know it's going to be on point.
Yeah. It said this. Your brain is like a supercomputer, and your self-talk is a program it will run. So if you tell yourself you're not good at remembering names, you will not remember the name of the next stranger you meet because you program your supercomputer not to. Your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk.
Yep.
And so you want to keep that positive. So how do you change that? How do you change it? One of the things that I feel like, and I did a few episodes on changing negative beliefs and negative self-talk. Simple thing we could do is put very powerful words, only 3 letters at the end of that sentence, and the word is yet, right? I don't have a great memory yet, right? And then it just opens up this possibility, something a little simple like that. Changing little things like that make a big difference. Like I did an episode on how gratitude rewires your brain, like the science behind gratitude. And it's interesting, like even like these little hacks, like instead of all the things you got to do, I got to take the kids to school. I got to help them with their homework. I got to work out. I got to eat this food, whatever it is. Changing that one little letter in got, that O into an E. I get to take my kids to school,
it's huge.
right? I get to eat, I get to eat the best foods ever. I get to work out today, right? It just changes your attitude. And it's very true that your attitude affects your altitude in life. And I think that's really important. So managing your self-talk, self-awareness, I think is a superpower. Just being aware that we're doing it is important. That's why journaling is so important. I really don't know, like if it's, I look at studied geniuses, and I do believe genius leaves clues. That when somebody is exceptional, that's why I have so many coaches, somebody is exceptional. I don't mean IQ genius. That's the furthest thing I'm thinking about. I'm talking about somebody who is excellent in their field, right? In their expertise. I believe that there's always a method behind the magic, and it's learnable. But one of the keys is taking a noun and turning it into a verb, meaning I don't believe that you have creativity, or you have focus, or you have memory, or you have love, or you have energy. I think those are actually things you do. You don't have creativity, you do creativity. You don't have focus, you do focus. You don't have a memory, you do a memory. And you don't have love, you do loving things. And so the benefit of taking it into a verb is there's movement, right? It's not something that's static. I wake up, I hope I'm creative so I can write my book today or whatever, right? It turns into a process, and then you could do it step by step, and you can access it, at will. And so same thing when it comes to your learning. When we're talking about memory, there's no such thing as a good or bad memory. There's just a trained memory and an untrained memory. And if somebody has a great memory, you could learn how to be able to do it because genius leaves clues. And there's always a method behind the magic. So another thing you could do to be able to change your negative self-talk, there's a lot of different modalities. You know this, like things like EFT, right? Like tapping. Yep. Tapping on the meridians is a great way. I did a whole episode on using magic to change your negative self-talk, and I have this acronym called ABRA, like abracadabra, and A, Oh, you'd love this. A has to do, so let's say I have a negative self-talk, right? I'm going to give you an abridged version of this podcast episode, very, very, in like 30 seconds.
Perfect.
You have negative self-talk, or you have some kind of pain and discomfort in the body. A, so it's A-B-R-A, right? Abracadabra is magic. Abracadabra is actually words turn into reality. Right, that's like when magicians do that, because your self-talk is huge, right? And then imagine that if everything you said to yourself came true, like would you be more self-conscious about the things that you said for?
Yeah.
And people all the time, they're like, oh, I have a horrible memory, I'm not smart enough. If you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them, right? If you argue for your limits, they're yours, right? So you want to be very, very, very conscious. But the A, let's say I have a negative self-talk, oh, I have a horrible memory. You acknowledge it. So the A is you acknowledge it, because you don't want to fight it and counter it, because I do this thing in audiences where I have them like raise their hand, and I have them raise their other hand. I say, push the other hand, push the other hand, push the other hand, and then they push, and then literally, like what I would think the whole audience would just fall down, because I never say push back, right? But in general,
resistance.
Right, what we resist persists.
Yeah.
And so you don't try to fight it. You don't try to say, like, oh, I have a positive memory. Like you don't do that. Like it's like not thinking of a big polka dot purple giraffe. Don't think of a big purple polka dot giraffe. Don't think of it, no matter what you do for $1 million, don't think of that giraffe. We're going to do it because we can't process negatives, right? So you acknowledge it, because if you resist it, you're just going to persist, right? So the A. The B is the power of breath, right? You breathe into it. Let's say you find the space where that idea or that pain or that discomfort is. So you acknowledge it and you don't resist it, and you breathe into it. And then the R is you release. Right, you breathe in, infinity and power and freedom and creativity, and then you release that, whatever that thing is holding you back, right? Yeah. And then the last A is align.
Bam!
There you go. Done.
Infringement.
Yes. How do I drop this mic that's on my head?
It's not possible. It's too expensive. We need more sponsors.
But then you align, and you talk about how to do that. But just you align to maybe the opposite, more of your truth, right? And I really do believe that it's, even when people set goals, it's not necessarily one of the reasons why we procrastinate, we self-sabotage is it's not our truth, right? And we want to know what our truth is, because it's usually some expectation set by our parents or the Joneses or whatever it is, but you align back to what the reality is. And I think another way of just changing your limiting beliefs is to get yourself to do something you never thought you could do. Like the acro yoga we're doing this morning, right? Yeah. That opens up new possibilities. Like in every single, in our online programs, or even I teach people how to memorize my top 10 favorite brain foods. And you're like, there's no way I can memorize that in a few moments. And they do it, and they're like, oh, wow, I did it. What else is possible? Or I'm reading 25, 50% faster. What else can I do, right? Yeah. And so you kind of shake up the limiting belief. Kind of like talking about athletics, because I know you work with a lot of athletes. Decades ago, Roger Bannister in 1954, he was famous for breaking the 4-minute mile. Right? Throughout human history, nobody could run a mile in less than 4 minutes. And interesting, he did it. If you look at interviews, he closed his eyes. Besides physical training, he did mental training. He closed his eyes and imagined himself looking at the clock, crossing the finish line, and it says 3:59, 3 minutes, 59 seconds. Wow. Because he knows what you know, what all of your listeners know, is that success is an inside-out process. That, as the famous Dr. Wayne Dyer says, it's not you'll believe it when you see it. It's the opposite. You'll see it when you believe it. Right? And so it's interesting. He knew it had to happen inside to happen outside. And that wasn't interesting to me, though. What was interesting to me was what happened afterwards. For hundreds of years, nobody can run a mile in less than 4 minutes. One person does it. What happens after that?
Cascade.
Yeah, there's this cascade effect.
Floodgates.
Literally dozens of people start running a sub 4 minute mile. Why? Was there the next couple of years, were there big evolutions in personal training and supplementation and foot shoe technology? No, right? Where was the change? Belief. Yeah. Right? Because you know what the belief was back then? The belief was back then that the human heart could sustain a sub 4 minute mile, and it would explode in your chest. Now, that wouldn't keep me from running I'm a runner. That wouldn't keep me from running a 4 minute mile. That would keep me from jogging. I wouldn't even jog anywhere, because I would be so concerned, because all behavior is belief driven. all behavior is belief driven. If you want to get a result in life, you need to do a behavior. But in order to do that behavior, you need a belief that allows that to happen. And so that's a big distinction. And so what I would say is that's one of the core tenets of learning or achieving anything in life is if you believe you can or you believe you can't, either way, you're right.
Wanted to take a quick break and thank our sponsor, Organifi, for supporting the show. Organifi is a rad company. I utilize their superfood blends on a daily basis. Holding in my hands the green juice right now, filled with all the green powders your little heart could desire, from wheatgrass to spirulina to chlorella to matcha. Really excellent stuff. Highly recommend checking them out. They also do protein blends that are vegan, as far as I can see. So the protein they're using in here is pea protein, quinoa protein, and pumpkin seed protein. Everything's organic. Everything's delicious. Highly recommend checking them out. So go Organifi, ORGANIFI.com, and utilize the Align code for 20% off. Organifi.com, Align code, ALIGN, 20% off. Get that stuff. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Back to the show. Pow. So you're really tremendous at communicating in a way that allows people to grab onto handles, and your language is formed into tweetables, and you do mnemonic devices and all that. Is there some way to kind of hack language, which hack I'm like kind of mockingly using it, but little tips that people can take away to be able to communicate better to their family or to their team or to themselves, that the language is more impactful?
Yeah, I would go. That's a perfect segue. So we're talking about how to be memorable, right, and be unforgettable. And we're talking about MOM, right? The M is motivation. So what I would say is, first, if you want to be a better communicator or if you want a better memory, first tap into the M, which is motivation, which, going back to feeling, is just showing you care. Because when we forget somebody's name or we forget a quote, whatever, we're just saying it's not that important. Because remember, like when we had the $1 million there, everyone's remembering someone's name for $1 million. So it had nothing to do with your capability. It had everything to do whether or not you wanted to or not. So I always start with, I remember I was doing this talk in Silicon Valley, and afterwards, someone in the audience, it was actually Bill Gates, comes up to me. And we had this, I asked him, I was like, if you could have any one superpower, what would it be? And he's like, the ability to read faster. I'm like, oh, I could totally help you with that, right? Yeah. But we had this deep conversation about the future education, and this crowd's gathering around. And I'm talking about it from a theory standpoint, adult learning theory, accelerated learning, meta learning. And he's taking it from a tools technology standpoint about where the world's going from technology and education. And somebody listening, saying, hey, is there anything missing? And we talked about it, and we were like, motivation. We both came to the same conclusions, that understanding human motivation, because so many people know they should do X, but they don't do it. So how do you tap into that? And one of the powers of doing that, one of the ways of doing that, is asking new questions. So like remembering someone's name, ask yourself before you meet them, why do I want to remember this person's name? Maybe it's to show them respect. Maybe it's to make a new friend. Maybe it's to do some business. Maybe it's to practice these things I learned on this episode, right? Because what you practice in private, you're rewarded for in public. What you practice in private shows up. Yeah. I was coaching, and I know we're saying a lot of quotes in this, and this is great. So you could actually write down all these quotes as you're listening to us, and we'll teach you how to memorize those also.
We have show notes, no big deal. People can grab them on the show notes.
Go to the show notes.
Show notes.
And then, so I was working with this actor. I was working with Will Smith, right? And I wanted to find out, and I posted on Instagram, I was like, what do you do for your brain? And we did this Insta story. It was like, I run and I read every single day. Do something physical and I do something mental, right? And they were shooting this movie at nighttime. And I was like, dude, how do at 3 o'clock in the morning do you prepare to just like, you're waiting here all this time? And then they go, all right, they're ready to film. And how do you get like ready? And he was like, he looked at me, he was like, Jim, I don't have to get ready. I stay ready. Yep. Because that's what you do. When I say you practice in what you practice in private, you're rewarded for public. Like you live this. Like we spend time together, through our sessions and social. Like you live what you teach. And I really do believe the life you live are the lessons you teach. Right? The life you live are the lessons you teach others. And it's not what you say, because it's better well done than well said. And everyone, that's why I feel like just because you won't buy the book or anything, you feel like you get credit for that, or just because some people could repeat everything you and I teach, but they're not doing those things. So they really know it, right? And so I feel like knowledge, again, is not power. It's only potential power. And so going through here, I'm just saying, how do you put it into action? So the motivation is asking yourself, why do you want to remember a person's name? Because here's the thing, reasons reap results. Reasons reap results. If you can't come up with one reason or do something or remember something or to remember a quote, whatever, you won't remember it. But the O, going back to your question, what I would say is, like, how do you become a better communicator, a clearer communicator to somebody and make it more memorable and stand out? The O stands for observation. Observation. A lot of people blame their memory on their retention. It's not their retention, it's their attention. If you really want to know what the art of memory is, the art of memory is the art of attention. It's the art of presence. And I feel like if you want to be a great communicator, or if you want to have a great memory. So President Bill Clinton, a lot of people don't realize this. He has an incredible memory. And how I know this is I met him once, and then a couple years later, and it was a very brief encounter. A couple years later, there's a charity event. It was like 2,000 people. And I go and I look at my badge, and it says, okay, this table. And I go to this table, the signed table, and I'm the first one there. And then after I sit down, Forrest Whitaker sits right next to me. And I'm a huge Forrest Whitaker fan. And then if anyone hasn't seen Black Panther, I love all these movies. And then after that, Richard Branson sits right next to him. And then Ashton Kutcher sits next to him. Ashton's twin brother, who I didn't realize had a twin brother, sits next to him. And then 20 minutes into dinner, President Clinton sits right next to me. And I'm flipping out because I don't even know. I swear, it's so crazy. Like I had the post is on Instagram. I don't know how this happened, but the lesson I get from it, and the reason why I'm mentioning these names is not to drop names. It's actually more of a memory device, because next time you watch Will Smith or Fly Virgin, Richard's playing whatever, it'll remind you of the lesson as opposed to talking about Bill Smith,
That's
right?
Good tool.
So President Clinton sits down and we're having this conversation, and here's the reason why I know he has an incredible memory is he remembered my name. And I was like, okay, fine. Maybe he was fed the name. He knows, obviously, Secret Service, whatever, knows who's sitting at the table. And then he starts talking about picking up the last conversation we had. And I'm like, whoa, that they wouldn't know. That's freaky. And when he's talking to me, this is the thing, Aaron, I felt really weird, actually, because I noticed, you know how you step out of yourself a little bit, like sometimes when you're in a conversation? Yeah. And I noticed he's not paying attention to anyone else at the table. And there are a lot more important people in that room than me. But he was like looking right at me. And a lot of times when you're out at events, people are looking over their shoulders, like who's more important.
Sure. Los Angeles.
and so it's a big challenge to their focus. But going back to O is observation. President Clinton has this incredible memory, and regardless of your political ideology, you have to admit, like talking about being a communicator, like that was the question, right? How do you be a better communicator? He's a great communicator. He's got great charisma. He has clarity, right? He's a great connector, and he's got incredible memory. But I think his incredible memory and his powerful presence comes from being powerfully present. That his incredible memory and his powerful presence comes from being powerfully present with people. And that's something that's available to who? All of us, right? And that's the thing. When it comes to being a better communicator or having a better memory, it helps just to be present with people, being not looking over your shoulder, looking around, or even more, what people are doing is they're not distracting themselves externally, they're distracting themselves internally. Like most people, if they're really honest, they're not really listening. They're waiting for their turn to talk, or they're thinking about how they're going to respond. Yep. But one of my very favorite books of all time, it's a must-read, is by Dr. Stephen Covey. It's called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. These are the 7 habits that are, most effective people subscribe to and practice. Because first you create your habits, and then your habits create you, right? First you create your habits, and then your habits create you. The most popular episode that we produce by far in our podcast are my daily morning routine. Like the 10 things I do every single morning to jumpstart my brain. Because those habits, if you want, as you've heard from other people, like if you want to win the day, you got to win the first hour of your day. And they say up to 40% or more of your activities every day are habitual. right? Even our thoughts, they say we have about 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. Let's say 60,000 thoughts a day, which are a lot of thoughts, right? I think it might be giving more people credit than, but here's the thing, 95% of those thoughts are the same thoughts we had yesterday.
I wonder how much of it's food and sex.
Survival, right? And so
quite a bit.
Big parts of the brain. And so here's the thing, that's why we don't have new changes in our life, because 95% of our activities, our movements, our thoughts, our emotions are the same we had yesterday. And how do we make like big leaps? Another one of my favorite books is a book called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, who's one of the most successful angel investors. Basically saying the goal is not to go from 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. That's incremental growth. How do you go from 0, nothing, to something brand new, 1? Right? And really it starts going back to the power of questions. Like if you had to, like think about your 5 or your 10-year goal. If you had to reach your 10-year goal over the next 6 months, how would you do it?
Yeah.
I mean, you ask a new question, you get a new answer, right? And that's all thinking is. It's just, this process where we're asking questions and we're answering questions inside our own mind. But going back to observation, I'm saying that most people aren't present. And in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seek first to understand the person, and then to be understood. And I feel like that all you have to do is what? Be present and listen. Even if everyone's just imagine the word listen in your mind and the screen in your mind. And if you can't imagine it, imagine you can imagine it. And you see the word listen. If you just scramble the letters, kind of like a brain teaser, what other word does it spell? Like perfectly. It spells the word listen. If you move the letters around, it spells the word silent. And most people aren't silent. And when I'm talking about having a stellar memory, like think about it. We're only at the M and the O, right? M is being motivated, caring. Because how are you going to show someone you're going to care for their future, their family, their health, whatever it is you're offering them, if you don't care enough just to remember their name, right? So just motivation is just caring about a person. And the O is observation, is just being present with somebody. So I think really memory is just being a good human being, caring about somebody and being present with them, because they don't want your gifts. They want your presence, which is another word for gift. But finally, the last M in mom are the mechanics. And I don't mean the person that fixes your car. I mean the tools, the techniques, the strategies on how to remember names, how to learn another language, how to remember quotes, how to give a speech. I train a lot of the TED speakers how to give their 18-minute talk from memory, right? But I put that last only because I really do believe 80% of success is the mindset. Motivated, showing you care, and being present. And then the mechanics are what we put in our podcast, what we put in our online programs.
Yeah. We got to wrap this thing up. You got to go to Italy.
Yeah. Let's talk about quotes real fast. Can we talk about quotes?
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing that was popped my, because I was trying to be present, and also it's an interesting dance in podcast land, that truth of being present and silent with somebody and not just prepping the next thing you're about to say.
Yeah.
It's a really important practice. But one of the things that was popping up as you were saying there is it seems like maintaining like a child's mind is maybe one of the most important parts of success. And remembering, it's like if a kid's not interested in something, they just stop doing it.
Yeah.
Like we force ourselves into these different boxes, and then we force ourselves to have to memorize all these bullshit reports and labels. And you're just like, I don't know why I don't remember. It's like, dude, you are put on this earth to do something else, maybe. So respecting, I think that the child's mind, being able to just like, maybe there's a reason you're not into any of this. Maybe there's a reason you don't remember any of this stuff.
I think there's a big truth to that. Having a child's mind, or, in Zen, like the beginner's mind, emptying the cup and just feeling like a lot of people, they'll fight again saying, oh, I have all this experience in healing or sales. Like maybe it's 30 years, but some people, if you really deconstruct it, they've had 1 year of experience that they've repeated 30 times.
Right.
Like with you, you're always learning, so you're always improving your craft. But some people settle and they don't have that beginner's mind anymore, and they can't advance anymore beyond that, and that becomes like the prison that they're in.
Yeah.
And so I think that attitude is so important, because children are the fast. They learn so fast, and they have fun with it too. And really, the message here is just fall in love with your brain. Love your brain. Fall in love with learning again. You know, and it's really not about how smart you are. I don't believe in IQ. I don't think it's fixed at birth. I don't think that SATs is just math and verbal. There's so many other intelligences besides that. Multiple intelligence theory says it's not just verbal, mathematical. What about interpersonal intelligence? People who are great with people. That's a form of incredible intelligence, genius. What about people who have kinesthetic intelligence, right, with the body, like athletes and dancers and such, you know, the work that you do? What about people who have visual spatial intelligence, people who could edit these videos and have great graphic artists and architects? You know, what about environmental, like natural intelligence, meaning connection to nature? There's so many. What about musical intelligence, right? I mean, there's so many. And so it's not how smart you are or how smart your kids are. It's not that you're asking the wrong question. It's not how smart you are. It's how are you smart? And that's really the key. And then that instantly gives you permission, because the school system, and it's not a slight against teachers. Like, my mother became a school teacher because she wanted to help me with my challenges, right? And, you know, I have an aunt that's a school teacher. It's not the teachers. They're some of the most giving, underpaid people in this country. And it's a system issue, right? The world has changed so fast. We're on our smart devices. We have electric cars and spaceships that are going to Mars. But our vehicle of choice when it comes to education and learning is like a horse and buggy.
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
They say of Rip Van Winkle, you know, the guy who slept for decades, if he woke up today, the only thing he would recognize are schools. And the world has changed so much. And if you feel stressed, overloaded, distracted, and you're suffering from like digital dementia where you can't remember things, you feel like you can't remember if you shampooed your hair in the shower, or you can't remember, you go to the store to buy one thing, you come back with like 2 bags of things except for that one thing you needed to buy. It's not your fault. It's just we weren't taught how to do this.
You said you're, and we really got to wrap up, holy God, but that's okay. This is just be a longer episode. That's all right. But you got to go to Italy.
I know.
That's the big thing. But you said that we think that our brain is like our shoe size, you know, that it doesn't change.
Right.
And then the thing that popped up for me with that, while I was trying to maintain silence and presence, is our shoe size also expands when we take our freaking shoes off.
Interesting.
So most of us are concealed in these tight little high-heeled whatever shoes that are actually constricting the potential of our bone structure. You could kind of say like the schooling system is a similar metaphor.
That's interesting.
Where it's concealing you. It's you putting this into this container. But if you can find the courage to come the shit out of the container, you know, and just allow yourself to kind of...
And you could be free to soar, and you could be literally grounded also at the same time.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that. Yeah.
How do we remember quotes? Then we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah. I mean, all these things. All right. So I get to work with a lot of actors and poets and helping them, you know, word for word. I'll give you a few brain hacks, and then I did 2 episodes on this. So first thing, you got to read the quotes. And so going back to the speed reading, I would use your finger while you read, because it'll help you be more in touch with it. So I'll give you a bunch of R's right now. R, first, because I like iteration and it's a mnemonic device. Read, right? And then the second R, reflect on the quotes, right? And so this is not, again, this is common sense, but it's not common practice. All I'm doing as a coach is making this explicit for people. And I have like 15 different R's, and you could go through them. But the second thing I would say is reflect on it. Like, really, what does this mean? Because you don't want to just repeat things ad nauseum. You want to understand them and have that meaning. Just same thing when you're reading something, right? I would say the third R is you want to write them. And I would actually say not type them, but actually hand write these things, because there's this visceral connection. I did this whole episode on note-taking. What's better, digital note-taking, typing things out, or handwriting? And across the board, when people are tested for comprehension and retention, handwriting. Handwriting. So handwrite it out. But other things you could do, like I teach something called a review technique, where you actually study it, because repetition could be one of those R's also as well, because it is power. My goal, though, is to give you something other than just repeating things over and over again, right? When I memorize 100 names or numbers or words, I repeat it once, and everyone could get the same kind of results. It's kind of like working out the body, because it's intensity, frequency, and duration. You could go and, you know, frequently do lots of reps, or you could do durations, more time on the elliptical or whatever, or you can make it so intense and get similar kind of results. We use it based on intensity, because it's working smarter than harder. But I would say there's a space review that if you wanted to consolidate short to long-term memory, one of the things you could do is space out the training. And then another R is rest, because you actually consolidate short to long-term memory when you're sleeping, right? Sleeping is so important because you could do everything else, eating the best foods, controlling your negative self-talk, being around the best people, cleaning your environment, right? New learnings and stress management. But if you're not sleeping, you're not that one thing can be off. Everyone wants to know what the magic pill is. There's no magic pill, but there are magic processes. You got to do like all these things. And so sleep, I would say, just a reminder for everyone who's listening, from a cognitive standpoint, I'll give you 3 reasons why you want to sleep. Number 1, short to long-term memory. That's where you actually consolidate it. Number 2, it's where you clean out the plaque in your brain that could lead to brain aging, Alzheimer's and such. But the 3rd reason, it's when you dream. And that dream state is so very important for the creatives and for everyone listening to this. You don't realize it, but then when you're learning all day, your brain doesn't shut off at night. If anything, it's more active. And you're actually coming up with new ideas and new solutions for your business, for your body, for your life. But when you wake up, you forget your dreams. Like the number 1 thing I do in the podcast where I remember, where I jumpstart my brain, the first thing I do when I wake up are remember my dreams. Because you don't realize this, but in human history, culture, a lot of things came from dream states, meaning Mary Shelley came up with Frankenstein in her dream. Elias Howe created the sewing machine in his dream. Like a chemist created the framework for the periodic table in his dream.
Thomas Edison used to do that.
Yeah.
Wasn't he the guy? He had the little bearings, and he would, as he was working, he would hold the bearings in his hands, and then they would drop, and then he'd wake up. And was that Edison? It was somebody.
Yeah, like Einstein did it at Princeton because he wouldn't want to go in these dream states. We talk about brainwave states like theta, which is the creative state. So that's a great creative. Like when you sleep, you go into the brainwave state. When you take showers. It's like you go into that creative state. You know this, right? When you're in the shower, you come up with all these great ideas. It's always when you can't write anything down, so you need these memory tools.
Yeah, you need to get one of those little waterproof things.
I took 6 showers this morning to prepare for this interview, so I could be like my best.
We're actually in the shower right now for audio listeners.
Cold showers, really good for you, right?
Yeah. Unless you're doing video.
Yes.
Then it's better to...
Right.
Sorry.
And so... Going back to these thought experiments, theta states, brainwave states, alpha states, a great state for learning. We actually teach people to get into alpha states to learn languages. So one of the states you could actually go into to learn quotes better is this alpha state, this meditative state, because your conscious mind is set aside and you just absorb information. One of the things that puts you into an alpha state, meditation, self-hypnosis, that's like your critical mind isn't fighting this new idea, saying you take action, you learn things fast and effectively, you have a great memory. It's not fighting that. So that alpha state. Deep breathing will put you in alpha state. Baroque music, classical music will put you in alpha state. Baroque, 60 beats per minute, harmonizes with resting heart rate and such. So there's all this depth to it. But I would say, going back to the state, all learning is state dependent. And so what I would say is the rest is important, but what are you dreaming about late at night? Like, even yesterday, the song Paul McCartney, he came up with yesterday in his dream state. So I'm just saying, like, get your restful sleep, get your REM sleep. But then I did an episode on 6 keys on how to remember your dreams. Critical must listen to episode. And then finally, a couple more R's to go through, like how to memorize quotes when you're doing it on your Insta story, which I love, is this is interesting. Reform means switch it around a little bit. Like you do...
make it yours. Bruce Lee talks about that.
Very much so.
He says, don't call it cat, cow, whatever. Like, make your own name for it. I call it spinning dragon kick. You call it Jim Kwik super thruster.
Exactly.
But make it yours.
I like that. The
Jim Kwik super thruster. I've been thinking about that for weeks. Finally get to release that.
And then you could reform it to content, and you could also reform the context in terms of how you do it. Like, you're really good like doing voices. So like, even like when we're doing our sessions together, you'll say something and then you do it in different voices, like randomly. I'm like, why is he doing that? But that helps you remember it. So if you want to remember a quote, try doing it like in Mickey Mouse's voice or Donald Duck's voice, right? Or, high pitch or volume and everything, because that novelty creates the neuroplasticity that helps you to remember it better. And, dude, we can go on and on and on.
I love it. Let's keep doing this if we can. If you're down, I'd love to do a part, 2 to 12 or whatever's good. how do people learn more about your stuff and find you? I'm like I'm so stoked that I got to learn about you more in like a professional way. I've only known you as like Jim
through our sessions,
Jim the Bud, but I'm excited about the stuff you're doing, man.
Yeah, I would say if people want to get the most out of this, to take their brain to another level, 3 things, really, really simple. Number 1, I would say follow us both on social media. Because you and I are daily giving inspiration, instruction on body and brain.
What is your handle on there?
It's just everything's at Jim Kwik, Kwik, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Cool.
So I do my Instagram lives, my Facebook lives, and I just do Q&As, and I'm just answering these questions all the time. The second thing is the podcast. So if anyone has 10 or 15 minutes, they're brain hacks for busy people, want to learn faster and achieve more. And so how to learn a language, how to give speech, all this great stuff, how to change your habits, great episode. Just go to kwikbrain.com, kwikbrain.com, and I have additional training free on that, speed reading and memory training, where I take live audiences up, and you could actually teach you how to remember their names. And then the third thing I would recommend for everyone to get the most out of this episode is actually the last brain tip I'll give you is if you want to learn something faster, any subject or skill, learn with the intent of teaching somebody else.
Yeah.
And we know this, right? Those who can't do, teach. And it's not actually a negative, it's actually a positive. If you can't do something, teach it and you get better at it. And you'll, like if you had to re-listen to this episode and had to teach this the next day, your attention would be better, you would take notes better, you would post different questions and forums and, on social media. So I'd say one of the ways you could do it is take a screenshot of this episode that you're listening to right now, tag both of us on there, and then post your big aha to your friends, and your family. And that would be a way of you integrating it. Just like you said, it doesn't become our information, it becomes their information. Right. You own it, and intent matters. So learn with the intention to teach, because when you teach something, you get to learn it twice. Take a screenshot, tag us both, and I would love to see everyone's big aha. What was the one thing that you would say you're going to do or learned that's going to make a difference that you're going to apply? And then also publicly putting it out there makes you more accountable and responsible to be able to put into use.
I love that. And then do you do online programs and ways people can go deeper into this?
We have a 30-day focus program. We have a 30-day speed reading program and a 30-day memory program. Just go to Kwik Learning, kwiklearning.com, and that's basically to learn any subject, anytime, faster.
Sweet.
Dude, this was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to keep doing it.
Yeah, we're gonna do this.
So stay tuned.
Dude, I want to get you on my show.
Yeah, we can do that. If we do that, we'll co-release this, assuming we do that, and then so people can jump over to that as well.
And then we'll also can I leave everyone with a quote
Please.
that they can memorize?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, here we go. I compare your life to an egg. That if an egg is broken by an outside force, life ends. But if it's broken by an inside force, life begins. All great things begin on the inside. And you have greatness inside of you, you have genius inside of you, and now is the time to let it out.
Who's that? Is that you?
That's me.
God dang, Jim Kwik. Thanks, man.
Right.
I appreciate you. All right, over and out. Tune in to part 2.
Align Podcast.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into that conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. There's some ways that you can support this podcast, one of which you can pick up an Align band, which is a heavy-duty resistance band. Comes along with a door anchor and a carrying case and a video guide on how to mobilize those joints and integrate that body of yours. Really great stuff. You can be found at aligntherapy.com and also on amazon.com. Thank you also so much for utilizing the Amazon affiliate link on the right-hand sidebar of the podcast page. Bookmark that thing. Anytime you purchase some crap on Amazon, purchase that crap through that link. We get a percentage of it, costs you nothing. And I think that's enough. Thank you guys so much for reviews on iTunes. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Pow.